as a marginal sand and gravel resource area, which isn't even a designation within the City of Ottawa's official plan. The applicant hasn't even provided a rationale for this claim. Secondly, there's a claim that the site, because the proposed lot is across the street from an active extraction operation, there is no possibility of an expansion. However, I guess the biggest issue is the report doesn't address the impacts of the proposal on the mineral extractions for the surrounding areas. Staff met with the applicant on last week, Tuesday, to go over the issues. The applicant recognized or acknowledged the issues that still needed to be addressed. And in fact, Mr. Holtzman himself suggested that the application needs to be further adjourned to a second hearing in November until such a time that they can address the issues which staff has brought up. Mr. Holtzman sent an email on Monday acknowledging that there is further work needed to be done with this report. And at this time, the department does not have sufficient information to make a decision on this application, to provide an opinion on this application, rather. And so if the committee decides to hear it, the department will be recommending refusal of the application because it does not comply with the policies of the official plan at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Any further comments, Mr. Holtzman? He's still prepared to go forward?
Yes. I acknowledge and I respect the planning department on this one. However, there's a couple of things I need to point out. The official plan does have policies, and we believe we're working within them, and I'll give that evidence if the matter is heard today. Second of all, the city's official plan and the list of studies, technical studies required, does not have specific terms of reference for mineral resource impact assessments. So it's a little bit of a loose goose chase here. Third, in terms of analysis of the third point is the analysis of whether this would have an impact on other so designated lands. We were prepared to give you that today through some of the exhibits that we sent in last evening, and I wanted to make sure that those got to you. And Mr. Bird would help me with that evaluation. So we believe with that evidence and the suggested conditions of approval, if this committee was so inclined to approve it, we have more than enough information and can modify the reports as needed, as stated in the draft conditions. So, Krishan is correct. The other day we felt that maybe an adjournment would be helpful, but in further analysis, we felt that today's the day that we should bring the evidence forward to you and ask for a decision.
Thank you, Mr. Holtzman. Mr. Walker, you have something further?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I just want to make it abundantly clear that the report in its current state does not address the policies of the official plan. And it is very likely, if the application is approved, the condition will be unclearable. And as a result, the department requests that the application be adjourned so that we can continue to work with the applicant to address these issues and move forward.
Thank you. I'll just ask the panel if they're interested in hearing this application or going with Mr. Walker's suggestion for adjournment. Mr. Lewis?
I think it's up to the applicant. If they want to hear it, we'll hear it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Vervoort?
Sorry, yeah, I think it's up to the applicant to decide if they want to bring it forward.
Okay, Mr. Otto?
I think it's up to the applicant, but I would strongly advise them to maybe agree with the planning department at the present time.
Thank you. Ms. Chandler?
I agree with Mr. Otto. I'm willing to hear it, but I think that the risk to the applicant is pretty significant.
Yeah, I agree. We'll hear the application in order. And so application number 4 will be heard at that time. Thank you, Mr. Holtzman.
I'll try to make arrangements for Mr. Bird to be able to participate, okay?
Thank you.
Okay. If he's not, then we may be needing an adjournment at that point, okay?
Fair enough.
He's a key player here, so I'll give him a call. I guess I'll be off this and I'll give him a call and see if I can arrange for him to get involved. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now we'll move on to application number 1, which is for 60 Grady Crescent. Mr. Ireland is the agent on file. Mr. Ireland, are you here? See, your name is there.
James Ireland, I'm here. Yes.
Hello, Mr. Ireland.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Given that we did not receive a signed statutory declaration regarding the sign posting on the property, I need to administer an oath to that effect. Are you able to take that oath now?
Well, the homeowners actually put up the sign and kept it up. They should be available on this Zoom call. If it's Monique and Glenn Clayton. I sent them the invitation just so they could do this.
I do see them here.
Oath. I'm sure one of them can do it.
Okay. Mr. and Mrs. Clayton, are you available?
Yes, we are available.
Great. I need to administer an oath to satisfy the fact that you have posted the sign for the required number of days. Are you prepared to take that oath?
Yes.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing as instructed and was clearly visible and legible during that time?
Yes, it was and it has been.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ireland, would you take us briefly through your application, please?
Yes, certainly. Could I please have the site plan shared? Thank you. That's perfect. Okay, so 60 Grady Crescent, it's end unit townhouse in the Trend Village neighbourhood of Nepean. They want to, Glenn and Monique Clayton, the homeowners who you just spoke to, they would like to extend their garage with one more bay. So it's a 3.82 by 6.96 metre garage with a flat roof. Heights and the finishes are to match the existing single garage that they have. 26 square meters in area, so quite a modest extension to the dwelling. They will be tapering the driveway so that it meets both the private approach bylaw and also the 50% requirement for driveway coverage in a front yard. So we've covered off on those issues. There is also a small tree adjacent to the driveway. Glenn and Monique contacted the City of Ottawa's Forestry Department, Sean O'Neill, and he said that there wasn't any problems with the site extension to the driveway and it wouldn't affect that tree. And that's also reflected in the comments, the official comments from the Forestry Department. I think that clearly explains the proposal.
Very good.
I can move on to the 4 tests. The first test for minor variance is that the general intent and purpose of the official plan is maintained. So this property is in the general urban area, which is of course intended for residential development, amongst other things. There's no change to the use of the dwelling. There's no change to the type of dwelling. It's simply an extension for storage in a vehicle. So we submit that the official plan intent is maintained. The second test for minor variance is that the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw is maintained. Probably the most relevant purpose of the zoning is to regulate development in a manner that is compatible with existing land use patterns. Now, compatibility is sort of, I think, two things. One thing is compatible with the neighbourhood, and this neighbourhood was built in the 60s, 70s, and has undergone a significant amount of change. People have altered their dwellings, they've made double driveways, double garages, where they're originally singles. People have put carports on, people have filled in balconies. It really has been a neighbourhood that has been very flexible and has changed a lot. And this is another case of that happening. So in the great mix of things we have in this neighbourhood, it's very much consistent with that. It's also compatible with the neighbouring properties. It's well set back from any neighbouring properties. The closest would be across Jansen Road, so approximately 20 metres away. So it doesn't have any impact on neighbouring properties. If I could see the neighbourhood photos, please. It's in my cover letter. That's the elevations. It should be in the cover letter that was submitted. Is it possible to see those, please?
If you just give me a minute, I do need to pull up the cover letter. It wasn't
Thank you.
provided in the PowerPoint.
Sorry.
Is that the description or visual description of what other people are doing within the neighborhood?
Yeah, it's photos of the neighbourhood, essentially. Just to back up and give some context to what I just said about the neighbourhood character.
It was part of our package and we did review it. Yeah, but I think it's important for this meeting to have it up.
I agree. Sorry, so if you just scroll down to the end, really. Keep going. Okay, this is them basically. Keep going. Yeah, all these. They're sideways. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So just what I was speaking about, for example, photo number 2, they've made it into a double-storey dwelling there from an original bungalow. If you could just scroll down a little bit, please. They've extended off the side there. Just keep going. You can see people have filled in garages with living areas and then carport extensions, things like that. It just goes to my point about compatibility with the neighbourhood that's changing and to accommodate, I guess, changing needs. And this is an example of that. Thank you very much for showing that. Okay, third test. It's, like I said, it's a modest extension. We are seeking to be 2.3 setback from the corner side yard, whereas the requirement is 4.5 metres. This area has quite generous side yard setbacks or corner side yard setbacks already, and wide boulevards to the street. So our contention is that although this will be closer than 4.5 metres, as you walk or drive down Jansen or Grady Crescent, the appearance would be much the same because of this wide boulevard and therefore the intent of the zoning bylaw for this spacious side yards is maintained. That's added by a mature cedar hedge which runs along the side as well. Of course, vegetation doesn't necessarily last forever, but certainly at this point it's well disguised, that extension would be. Then the final test is the variance from the provisions minor, and I guess I've spoken to that a little bit already, that it's the nature of the street and the boulevard and the cross section is such that it just does appear to be minor. It's a minor extension. It allows for extra storage, and the yard is still accessible. It's very much desirable for the development of the site. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ireland. Mr. Walker, would you please respond with respect to your comments or this application?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The department has had an opportunity to review the proposal and has some concerns. From a review of the surrounding lots within the area, it appears as if the corner lots have setbacks that either meet or exceed the required minimum. And so the reduction would not completely maintain the character that exists along the street. However, that being said, the department is not of the opinion that the requested variance exceeds the threshold, or the requested relief exceeds the threshold of a minor variance.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. I'd like to ask the panel if they have any comments, questions, or concerns. Ms. Chandler?
This is directed towards Mr. Walker. These are pretty significant corner setbacks. What is the purpose, as you understand it in the zoning bylaw, for them being so substantial?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the purpose of the intent of the minimum corner side yard setback is to ensure that there is sufficient space between buildings and the street, and to contribute to maintaining a desirable landscape.
So this is a pretty significant encroachment on that space. Hedges don't always stick around. If that hedge weren't there, do you think that there would be, do you think that the purpose of that setback would be still met if it was just an extension out towards the road that reduced it as to 2.3?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the intent, it is possible that the intent may be generally met if the hedge was in there, because the department recognized that while at its closest point, the extension will have a setback of 2.3 meters. Staff recognized that the other portions of the property would have greater setbacks than the 2.3 meters.
Thank you.
Any comments, questions, or concerns, Mr. Otto?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis, any comments, questions, or concerns?
4.5 to 2.3, questionable probably whether that's minor or not. However, I'm fine with the application. I'll support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Vervoort, any questions, comments, or concerns?
I'm fine with it. Given that it's a corner lot, there's really no impact on any adjoining properties. And given the vegetative buffer, I'm fine with the application.
I agree with the majority, all the panel, essentially, that it meets the 4 tests, and it really does complement the fabric of the neighborhood with the extra garage. I'd like to ask the panel to vote in favor of this application. All in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you very much. Your application is approved, Mr. Ireland, Mr. and Mrs. Clayton.
Thank you very much, committee members.
You're welcome. We'll move on to application number 2. This is concerning 120 Wilbert Cox Drive. Mr. Hale, Mr. Colin Hale, I believe you're the agent for this property.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Mr. Hale. We don't have a statutory declaration on file today. I need to administer an oath to you. Are you prepared to take that oath now?
Yes.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing as instructed and was clearly visible and legible during that time?
I do.
Thank you. Please proceed to provide us with a brief summary of your application today.
Will do, yes. Good morning again, Mr. Chair and everybody. I'm wondering, as part of my submission, are the site plans and siting pictures available for viewing? Oh, yes, they are. Okay, perfect. I'll provide a quick overview and then I'll go through the 4 elements of the test. So what the application concerns a 1,000 square foot coach house that is proposed. The bylaw allows for an attached carport, and what is desired is to enclose the carport into a garage. Specifically, what is proposed is the exact same size garage as a carport. We feel that the application is minor in nature. In terms of, we also feel that the impact on The negative impact on siting, or there's no negative impact on siting or curb appeal. It's designed in a way to suit the character of the neighborhood, and the location is fully surrounded by trees and vegetation. I do have support from neighbors. Houses 119, 121, and 122 Wilbercox Drive have expressed their support. I have also notified all neighbors and did not hear any concerns. So yeah, with that said, I greatly appreciate the consideration of the committee. May I step through the 4 elements, 4 tests of the Planning Act?
Sure.
All right. So concerning number 1, I feel that the general intent of the official plan is maintained. This neighborhood is for residential use, and that is what the proposed, or the application is consistent with this use. In terms of the second element of the Planning Act, we feel that the main intent of the zoning bylaw for coach houses is to govern the size in order to be secondary to the primary dwelling or existing house, and I think to assure that the impact of the development is minimal and consistent with residential development in the neighborhood. Our proposed coach house does comply with these provisions, and feel that it is aligned with the overall spirit of the bylaw to enable, I guess, modest increase in densification of the neighborhood. In terms of the third test, is this desirable for the appropriate development of the land? I am requesting a minor variance to the zoning bylaw, and it is really to allow for construction of a coach house that is characteristic of the neighborhood. And given the tree surroundings, I don't feel that it's likely to be noticed. The fourth element of the test is a proposal minor. I feel that the extent of the impact of an enclosed garage over an open carport, which the current bylaw does allow, would be minor or non-existent. I don't feel it'll take away or negatively impact the streetscape or privacy from the abutting properties. It is, if you look at the site plan, the proposed coach house is on the west side of the property. The lot to the west side has an old farmhouse which is not being used, and the property to the east side has an existing dwelling, and that is in active use. And as you can see, the coach house is proposed to be nicely far away from that property. The styling of the proposed coach house was done to be compatible with the neighborhood, so we feel that it will complement the overall character.
Thank you, Mr. Hill.
Thank you.
Mr. Walker, can I ask you to comment on behalf of the city?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The department has reviewed the application and has no concerns with the proposal. Staff is of the opinion that the 4 tests are met in this case. At this time, staff has no further comments.
Thank you very much. Any comments from the panel? I'd like to ask Mr. Lewis if he has any comments.
The availability and affordability of housing make these attractive. I think they're a good thing. We got a little bit of a precedent setting thing here of what we call minor or not on a coach house, and what we allow. However, I'm happy. I will support the application.
Thank you. Mr. Revort, any questions or comments or concerns?
I agree with Mr. Lewis's comments, but I think we judge these on a one-off basis. I think in this particular case, the city's intensification objectives, there's adequate space on the property for the proposed coach house, and it would be subject to site as well, which would regulate the construction and the use of the coach house. So I'm in favor of the application.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vort. Mr. Otto, any questions or comments or concerns?
Yes, my concern is in the, I guess, the definition of a coach house, 95 square meters, including a garage. We're going, if we pass this, going to increase that by a significant amount. Why or who set this 95 square meter? And there must have been a reason for it, because you can't have two houses on one property. And that's why I believe they limited to that size of 95 square meters. So could the planner comment on that a bit, please?
Mr. Walker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the City of Ottawa, in its policy documents, have set size limits for coach houses. And the reason we have size limits is the intent is to allow the coach house to be built, but not in a manner where it becomes the principal dwelling on the site. That the same policy documents document that provide direction on coach houses also provides direction on minor variance for coach houses. And the document states that minor variances for coach houses will be considered so long as certain criteria are met, which was listed in staff's report, and staff is of the opinion that those criteria are met.
Thank you. Mr. Otto, any further comments?
Oh, I'm fine, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Chandler, any comments, questions, or concerns?
None.
Thank you very much. I don't have any comments, questions, or concerns. I echo Mr. Otto's comment, but I guess if we had an open carport below, it would be a pretty smaller, it would be smaller and occupancy load. So I would support this application. I would like now to ask the panel for approval of this application. All in favor? Your application is approved, Mr. Hale.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Then we'll move on to application number 3. Application number 3 is regarding 1650 Canaan Road. Mr. Mark Daniel, are you the agent for this property? Mr. Daniel? I think you're muted, sir.
Yeah.
There you go. Glad to have you with us. I understand
I
we
am.
have a
Thank you.
great. I understand we have a statutory declaration for the sign posting, so we don't need to administer an oath for you. Could you please proceed then and give us a brief explanation of your application today?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm the agent for the owner, 652.
Mr. Chair, sorry to interrupt. I think before we start the application, there is an amendment to lot number 1, and maybe we should just formalize that amendment first.
Right, I don't seem to have that on my
I think in
sheet.
the planning report, it indicates that it'll have a frontage of 120 meters instead of 100 meters.
That is B00227. That's the second application. Is that correct, Mr. Daniel?
Correct.
Okay. So we'll make that change. Thank you, Mr.
For
Ward.
interrupting. I just wanted to clarify that.
No, thank you very much. Go ahead, Mr. Daniel.
Okay, so yeah, I represent the owner, the company numbered 652642, and Mr. Bruce Little is the president. Mr. Little lives on this property since 1982. He purchased the tent and trailer park in existence. The property is located at the southwest corner of the intersection between Regional Road 174 and Cannon Road. That's in the most easterly portion of the city of Ottawa, right before the United Counties of Prescott and Russell and the city of Clarence-Rockland. As I mentioned, the landowner owns the tent and trailer park, and he wishes to sell. He's 82 years old, and he wants to retire from the commercial enterprise that he has operated since 1982. The tent and trailer park was in existence since 1971, which he purchased, like I said, in 1982. The property covers an area of, let me see here, 23.8 hectares or close to 60 acres. And it's traversed by a hydro line between the tent and trailer park and the owner's residence. The application is to create, the first one is to create a residential lot in the southern portion of the property fronting Cannon Road. It's a residential lot of 0.8 hectares, and as we've just corrected, it's 120 meters in frontage and approximately 67 meters in depth. We have had a environmental impact study provided to ascertain that the functions of the wetland that is identified in the area in the southern portion of the property won't be affected. And the other application is to sever the portion of the land covered by the tent and trailer park and all the area north to that, extending to Highway Regional Road 174. I'm used to say Highway 17. And that's about all there is in terms of characteristic of the property that I can provide for the committee. If there's any questions, I'm ready to answer them.
Thank you. I have one just on your comments with respect to the size of that property, having to do with the change we just made. The frontage was 120 meters. You commented that the depth was 67. The variance seems to be is 80 meters. Can you confirm whether it's 67 or 80? Maybe Mr. Walker can help with that too.
I believe so.
You believe it's what, 67 or 80?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can provide an answer to that question.
Sure.
So essentially, there are two technical amendments to this application. The first is the 16.7 hectare parcel that was identified as a severed lot is the retained lot, and the 6.3 hectare parcel that was identified as the retained lot is the severed lot. This is needed so that the severance can comply with the policies within the official plan. The second amendment is the dimensions for the vacant residential lot. It will have a frontage of 120 meters to a depth of 67 meters. And with these dimensions, the lot area would remain at 0.8 hectares, which is consistent with the policies of the official plan.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Walker. Mr. Walker, can you proceed then and have more comments if you have more comments on this application?
Yep. Yes. Thank you. So the department has reviewed the application and has no concerns with it, subject to the conditions below. The applicant has been made aware of the changes that's needed with the EIS, and the department will work with the applicant to ensure that those changes are made.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Any questions or comments from the panel? Mr. Otto?
No, I'm fine with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis?
None, thank you.
Ms. Chandler?
More a question of curiosity. Is this a seasonal park or year-round? Like, do people live here year-round, or is this a seasonal rental facility?
Daniel?
Yeah, it's seasonal.
So there's not a sewage system hookup for each trailer parking spot, but there's probably a sewage system disposal location?
Yes.
Okay, and where is that located on the site? The reason I'm asking this is I didn't see any comments coming in from any of the conservation authorities, specifically the Ottawa Septic System Office, which I would have expected to ensure that everything was being captured on the boundaries of this severance, including any sewage system pieces.
I don't know the exact location of the septic system for the tent and trailer park, but I know that Mr. Little has been keeping everything in compliance. He does get his inspections done. That's all I can say.
Yeah, I'm not concerned about the condition of it. I was just concerned about the location of it. Because there, you know, if I look at, normally it's information that would be available for a rural severance. I don't know, perhaps Mr. Chair.
I don't see anybody from our conservation partners online right now that could help with this, Ms. Chandler. Madam Coordinator, do we have anybody from our conservation partners?
But the question might go back to planning, whether this is something they checked.
Okay, Mr. Walker, can you make a comment on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Unfortunately, I cannot speak for any of the CAs or the OSSO, but I can assure you that the septic system for the campgrounds would need to remain on the campgrounds and cannot cross property line. When the applicant applies for the approval through the OSSO, it would be verified at that point in time.
But there's no reason for them to apply for an approval for a severance. I mean, if no one's commented on it, there's nothing to say except that I guess if the applicant could be made aware of the fact that down the road, if these severance boundaries in any way cut off or come very close to the location of the sewage system bed, that could cause issues in terms of conveyance of land down the road. So just with that information out there, I'll leave it.
Thank you, Ms. Chandler. Mr. Lewis, any questions or comments, concerns? Can't hear you.
I'm good with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Otto? Oh, yeah, I already got to you. May I speak with Mr. Vervoort? Any questions or comments?
No concerns or questions as long as the applicant is agreeable to the proposed conditions.
That was going to be my next question. Mr. Daigneault, have you reviewed the conditions for this application?
I have, and I've transmitted them to the owner. And he's in agreement with it.
Perfect. So he's in agreement with all 5 conditions. It's great. So to that end, I'd like to ask the panel for approval of this application with all 5 conditions. All those in favor? Thank you. Your application is approved, Mr. Daigneault.
Thank you.
Now we will proceed on to Mr. Holtzman and application for 2973 Stagecoach Road. And let me just see if Mr. Bird is there. Don't see him there. Mr. Holtzman?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning. Have you been able to reach your client?
I did, and he is going to participate by way of his phone, and he's dialed in, I guess, if that's the right term. There he is down, I think, at the bottom.
Okay. I see him there too.
Can we just check and see if he can hear us so that we won't duplicate each
Mr.
other?
Bird?
I'm here now, Bill. I was just did the unmute. Thank you.
Great.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So please go ahead, Mr. Holtzman.
Okay, so I wanted to make sure that the information, and I apologize for the lateness, but last evening I sent a link to a number of exhibits that I believe will be very helpful to guide me and guide us through this presentation. So so I guess do the committee members have the following exhibits? There was a Schedule A of the OP. that identified where the site was. There was a package of 6 air photos taking us through from 1976 through to 2017. There was a page that had 3 photos of the frontage of the property that showed some significant vegetation. There was a survey plan that had a number of municipal addresses noted on it with the subject property in red. And previously, there would have been the sketch plan denoting the entire property with the severed and retained. And there was a lot development plan that we submitted under cover letter dated October 1st. So I wonder if all of those materials can be accessed as we take you through our presentation.
Madam Coordinator, can you confirm that we have those to be able to put up on the screen?
Yes, Mr. Chair, they should be showing on the screen now, starting with the aerial photos.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, so maybe what you could do is put up the, if you wouldn't mind, put up the land use schedule A, and we'll just, hopefully I can take you through this fairly quickly. It may be more than 5 minutes if I could have your approval for that, and we'll get on it right away. And so it was one of the ones that I saw. There's the schedule over to the right-hand side. Yeah. Okay. So this application, we pre-consulted with city staff, planning staff, Shauna Turkington, who used to be the planner representing the department of the committee, back March of 2019. And it's a unique piece of property, as I'll get into. It has a number of land use designations. It's obviously in an area that has a number of different activities going on. She suggested that there was a couple of very significant issues that needed to be resolved. One is the wetland area to the east. That's that blue area on the map. It's a provincially significant wetland, and that an environmental impact statement would be required at that point to address that. Being in an area of sand and gravel resource area, there was comments from staff that we'd have to address the policy of the official plan, and it was suggested that an MRIA would be required. And the scope of work that she suggested following our meeting was twofold, essentially, was to look at the impact of what a residential lot would have on the ongoing operation across the street. It's a licensed pit, and Mr. Bird will talk a little bit more about the history of that and how it's winding down. And the second issue is whether our lands were actually suitable for residential, being not suitable for extraction. Now, since that time, of course, the scope of work has expanded, and I'll get to that through my presentation. The most significant issue, I believe, and I'll leave it up to planning staff to concur, is that, as you can see from that land use schedule, there's other gray, which is the sand and resource area, north and south of our property. So rightly so, staff have said, what would be the impact of your residential lot on those so designated lands? So I'll get to that in a moment. Excuse me. So we filed our application in July of this year. We filed it with an MRIA, as we understood it to be, and we prepared an EIS. An EIS was in consultation, further consultation with staff at the SNCA, I believe it's James Holland, and as well as Matthew Haley of the City of Ottawa, and they were very helpful. And in fact, after we had submitted the application, which was going to subdivide the land through the entire depth. Okay, so maybe could you pull up the sketch plan that shows the proposed lot? There it is there. So originally, when we submitted on July, the proposed lot would extend all the way through the depth of the lot, of the parcel. Okay, and we felt that was reasonable as long as there was tools to prohibit the development in the back part of the property. And that's what we spoke to in our reports. SNCA said they looked at the first report. They looked at it very quickly. They're very helpful and said, we would have some difficulty with extending the lot line all the way through the PSW. How about reducing the depth? And we said, absolutely, we would reduce the depth. And that's those two kind of orangey colored parcels of land. So that is the proposed severance, and the retained is the L shape around it. Now, keep in mind that those two pieces of property that form the proposed lot are 1.35 hectares. They're still quite large. They obviously keep the lot outside of the PSW. And in fact, there was an area of an unevaluated wetland, which it also stays outside. So a revised submission was made, revised reports were made, and it went on its merry way. Now, leading up to the last hearing, staff reviewed, we attempted to get this information into the hands of the reviewing agencies well in advance, because we knew that being technical reports would take some time. And obviously there's a full slate of other applications. And at the point of time before the previous hearing, staff recommended adjournment sine die because they, and I won't speak for them, but their position was it was premature pending modifications, revisions to certain reports, and the preparation of a lot development plan. They raised some very interesting issues. We don't disagree with them. And if you could put up that lot development plan, it's a plan with an EXP. It was not submitted last night. It was an earlier one. It would have been submitted under that October 1st letter.
We don't seem to have that plan. We only have the submission from your presentation that you submitted.
Well, I asked at the beginning of my presentation whether you had the lot development plan. It was submitted under cover letter October 1st, 2020. If you need some time to bring it up, I can continue on and I can revert back to that discussion, but I think
please continue on, Mr.
Okay.
Holtzman.
Okay.
We'll look for it.
Okay, so in the previous report, the staff recommended that there was some setback requirements that would have to be adhered to, and there was reference to otherwise you would not comply with, I believe it's, I don't have the actual wording, but the zoning requirement. There's a setback under section 67 that says you need to have 150 meters setback from lands designated ME2 and ME3. The lands across the street, and you see on that photo, address 2966 is a pit. And so we needed to be 150 meters back. Now this lot that we're showing there in orange is 191 meters deep along the north edge and 222 meters deep along the south edge from the edge of the road allowance. Now, so 150 meters left us plenty of room, and that lot development plan, which we submitted to the committee on October 1st, certainly illustrates that. Then on the back side, because we had environmentally sensitive lands to the back, we also need to respect a setback from those lands. And typically the setback is 30 meters from an established line, and we have over 40 meters. So the bottom line is on that lot development plan, there's a large area sort of to the back end of that orange block that has plenty of room for the safe installation of sewage system, private well, house, and of course the driveway would extend in off of Stagecoach. So that lot development plan, we believe, addressed the concerns of the staff about can this lot be properly laid out so you respect all the setbacks. So I'll leave that for now. Mr. Walker may have comments on that. Let me just collect this, my thoughts just for 2 seconds. So the issue essentially is, as I said, through the MRIA, or the Policy Official Plan about development of lands within the sand and gravel resource area. And in fact, the official plan doesn't speak to specifically requiring an MRIA. It talks about having technical reports. So our position to the committee today is that we have a report that adequately, in our view, addressed whether this existing pit could expand, and it can't expand across the road. Second, whether the material, there's the lot development plan right there. So I'll just quickly say that on that, you can see the area that is in purple, that has lots of room and respects the 150 meter setback from the other side of the road. And that staff guided us to that. And then it also has a setback from the east of 40 meters. So you can see that there's adequate room for, there's 150 square meter bungalow, and there's lots of room for all of the services and whatnot. So just back to the MRIA that we submitted. So we looked specifically at 2 issues, whether that existing pit, and Mr. Bird will speak to it, can expand, and it's not going to expand across the road, of course, because there's existing residential uses there. And second, whether our site has, since it's designated Sandon Granular Resource Area, whether it has capable material, and it has already been extracted and rehabbed. Now, the fairly new item, but it was raised to us a number of weeks ago, is, well, there's other lands so designated. So could you put up the Schedule A of the official plan, please? It was one of the exhibits from last night. You will see when that comes up that the gray area does extend. There it is there on the right-hand side. If you could sort of blow up that, if you could, you can see the red dot on the right-hand side. And essentially, there's sand and gravel resource area to the north of us, and then it crosses the road. So we've looked at the lands to the north, and Mr. Bird is well aware of those lands. He built the house on that, and I'm going to take you in a second through the air photos that shows how it was a pit, and it's also been rehabilitated. So although the designation still shows it as sand and gravel resource area, east of Stagecoach, north of our site, it's zoned rural, which doesn't permit that type of use. It's used for residential, and it's already been extracted. Now, just while we're on that schedule, and I'm going to take you to another exhibit, there's also lands south of us, but the red dot is the proposed lot, the proposed area. There is a house to the south, and there's two more houses to the south in that gray area. So again, establishing a pit south of us would be very challenging, because one of the tests of establishing a new pit would be, is there an impact on existing sensitive residential uses? So if you could put up that survey plan now that shows a number of municipal addresses. It was one that came in last night. I'm jumping around a little bit, committee, but I want to get through my 5 extended minutes, and then Mr. Bird can weigh in very quickly on the history of the air photos. We'll go back. Okay, right there. So you can see our site in red, 2961. Mr. Bird's residence is 2973. It was severed from 2943, which is the lands that are still gray. He built the house there. It's rehabbed. And a tiny corner of 2923, if we won't have to, but if we went back to that Schedule A tiny front little corner is gray. Otherwise, everything north of that on the east side of Stagecoach is not so designated. And south of our site, although it's designated, you can see a house at 305, 345, 381. Now, so I'm
Mr. Holtzman, we're well beyond the 5 minutes. I'd like to ask you to wrap it up a little bit.
Okay, there's 13 houses there. Establishing a new pit anywhere on the east side of Stagecoach is absolutely impossible. So I will take you to, so in my view, the conditions that are set out in the report, albeit they oppose the application, the conditions are reasonable. They ask us to further investigate the mineral extraction issues through an MRIA. The EIS has been done. There's no pushback there. So we believe those conditions are more than adequate to address any of the ongoing concerns staff have. Now, if you can put up the air photos, and maybe Mr. Bird can just take you through in his 5 minutes those 6 air photos, because he has a sense of the history of how the physical evidence of what I just said about the depletion of our site and the site to the north.
Thank you, Mr. Holtzman.
Okay,
Mr. Bird, would you like to?
This is Dale Bird. I'm the owner of the property. So yes, I just want to kind of restate what Bill has said is regarding the existing pit. I think most of all the other stuff has been taken care of as far as what the city has asked for regarding the wetlands, the EXP study that was done regarding soil quality, and that it came back as a negative and for existing. But that said, when you're asking for the mineral extraction part of this, that's where it gets a little questionable, because the property all in question has been extracted previously, as Bill has, provided the photos there going back as far as 1970 and some. We have owned the property since 1985.
Put up 76, please. Put up 1976, please.
Yes, I think the original photos you have, Bill, goes back as far as 1970 or 76.
Yes, please put the 1976
that,
photo up.
That it clearly shows that there is an existing pit on this property. And then as they progress, the pictures show that as when I built my existing home that I'm in now in 1985, I reclaimed like a good portion of that back just by having it backfilled in with existing material on the property to make it, much nicer piece of property, that it's not a big hole in the ground. Now, the pit to the north, or to the property just to the north of me, that wasn't backfilled. Like, that is still today an existing hole in the ground of, 30, 40 feet deep. It takes up significant frontage, where it shows on the official plan of where the mineral extraction would take place. It already has taken place. So that kind of answers that question as far as, is there going to be future mineral extraction there? No, because it's already been done. And as far as regarding across the road, like, I know this is just kind of hearsay in my opinion, but so the pit across the road, it's been in place. I don't know when the licensing really was. It's been here as long as I've been here. It kind of took off operations, I would think, maybe 15 years ago, 12, 15 years ago. In that time, so this is a fairly small operation. It's like 30 acres, give or take, just for the size of the pit. In the last few years, at the rate they're going, that pit is going to be defunct as well, because they're already 60, 70% through their property. And there is an existing on the other road on the other side. There's residential properties to the back of that existing licensed pit that they're not going to be able to exceed into as well. So they're very close to being at the point of that pit being defunct, because there's no more material there for them to extract. And that, being said, in the meantime, we've coexisted with these pits for as long as I've been here, 25 years. We've never had an issue, never had complaints with them. On my property, I built, buffer zones, did all the trees across the front to, make it look nice and to protect the view, that I'm not looking at a commercial pit or a commercial operation going on. And again, we've lived fine with that. We don't have complaints with that. We're the ones that have lived with it and do every day.
Please put up the photo that I sent in last night with the vegetated frontage, coordinator, please. It was one of the ones last night. Because the air photos will show that Mr. Bird planted trees all along the front, and there's a photo right there on the left-hand side. So that's the view. The site is on the right-hand side, or you can see the views, and those are fairly mature conifers that were planted in 1995 when Mr. Bird bought a property. So that's between the pit, which is on the left-hand side, and the proposed lot. Anything else, Mr. Bird?
Yes. Well, just a quick, like 95 is when I built my previous home. We've owned the property since about 85 in here, and that's when I initially started, trying to reclaim the pit. So yeah, that's my stance on it, anyways. I hope that this goes through. I've kind of been planning on this as my retirement lot since I purchased the property. I'm getting older and looking for my retirement home to build, and hopefully you just help me out in this.
Okay. Thank you, Mr.
That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Bird. Thank you, Mr. Holtzman. I'm going to now move on to Mr. Walker and ask Mr. Walker to comment on behalf of the city.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I start, I just want to note, here with me is Damian Whitaker, who is the city's senior project manager, who will provide comments on the inadequacies of the report. But I just like to say the department has reviewed the application, and the department stands by its initial comments. We have strong concerns with the proposal, and we recommend that the application be refused today because the report submitted does not address the policies within the official plan or the policies within the provincial policy statement. So as per section 3.7.4 of the official plan, it states that sand and gravel resource area or any mineral aggregates and non-renewable resources should be protected. Section 3.7.4.10 of the official plan states clearly that new development will not be approved within 300 meters of a sand and gravel resource area unless it can be demonstrated that such development does not conflict with future mineral aggregate extraction. The materials that has been submitted so far hasn't addressed those policies. In fact, based on Mr. Holtzman's presentation, he's more, the report submitted and their claim is more concerned with the active extraction site, active extraction site that's across the street. And they're also, heavily concerned with the subject property itself. but they haven't really considered the surrounding properties that are designated sand and gravel resource area. At this point, I'll pass it off to Damien to talk about the report.
We've reviewed the report and we've gone back to the applicant and suggested a number of comments to them. And the report is deficient in a number of ways, as Krishan mentioned, that some of the discussion about the east side of Stagecoach is conjecture. And the intention of the report is to look at this application's impact on the existing mineral resource extraction on the other side of Stagecoach and in the vicinity of the area exhaustively, and to talk about what those risks are, because the official plan and the provincial policy statement talk about impacting on the risk of extraction. And those comments in the report are at the moment in need of further work before the city can take this application on.
Thank you. I'm a little concerned that you're talking about a report for the pits being on the east side of, potential pits being on the east side of Stagecoach Road and to the north of the subject property at 2943, 2923, and 2509 Stagecoach. And there are residential properties already on those properties. Am I wrong?
Yeah.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Am I wrong? Yes.
So there are residential dwellings there, but the report, needs to talk about those risks and talk about what those impacts are. So in this case, the report then would need to say, look, we cannot extract these resources because there are dwellings there, but the issue is more about the ones on the west side of Stagecoach. So there's existing extraction there, and further development can put a risk on further extraction. And this needs to be exhaustively discussed in the report.
I see. Any comments, Mr. Holtzman?
Yes. So I acknowledge that up until today, we had not put forward information about the ability for lands on the east side to make use of that designation, but we put that forward. So I'll stand by our comments about those lands so designated sand and gravel resource area that there's physical evidence to show that. But again, we're not suggesting that we abandon updating those reports. What we're saying is we believe the committee has enough information. We hope they have enough information to make a decision with conditions. Those conditions are the ones that staff have proposed, rightly so, and we would have that year to satisfy updating those reports. We're very comfortable with that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lewis, any questions or comments?
Yeah, it's not straightforward by any means, but we can approve this application, and the applicant has to take their chances about satisfying the city, whether it can be done or not. We can adjourn it, and they can try and satisfy the conditions and then come back, or we can refuse it, and then they can, if they they can appeal and go on to the next level. So I don't know. I whether we pass it, I'd rather either pass it or adjourn it. But if the applicant wants us to pass it, he's got to come back and to the city and satisfy those conditions, and that's their thoughts, and then we're done with it. Here, I can see it's going to go back and forth for quite some time. Those are my thoughts, and I think I'm happy if that's what the applicant wants, to pass it and let them take the chances. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Ms. Chandler, any questions, comments, or concerns?
Couple of thoughts. So I am somewhat less concerned about the small areas with the designations on the east side of Stagecoach. The property that concerns me is there's the one on the west side, which is ongoing, the extraction there. based on one of the photos we were circulating, it looks like most of the extraction started at the road frontage and is moving backwards, if I'm correct. But what does concern me is the property directly to the north of that, addressed at 2914, which doesn't appear to have been used for mineral extraction at this point, but it's sandwiched between two pits. So I would think that that one is the one that is most likely to perhaps in the future need to go through a process to allow it to become that type of operation. That said, there's that little lot on the corner of it, which is between that property and the one that's being proposed. I don't know if it's a separate lot or if it is just a house on that lot. I would have much preferred to see the applicant resolve the the aggregate assessment done. I'm not clear on why it's such a rush to get this approved in advance of a technical report, which clearly is of concern to the city. I'm not a fan of that at all, unless there is some reason this really needed to move forwards. I think approving this with the conditions as extensive as they are really leaves both the city and the applicant in a very awkward position in terms of trying to get a report that the city's happy with, but that the applicant is quite absolutely sure is going to the city's tests to create a lot there. So at this moment, I'm not really convinced either way that this should be approved with conditions, acknowledging that there are a whole bunch of houses around there that's going to present significant obstacles for whoever wants to develop this, the lot to the north there, 2914, as an aggregate resource. But having been involved in a number of aggregate extraction activities, just getting an ECA to put conveyor belts, crusher, and loader on an industrial site like this is a very difficult undertaking when you're trying to work around a bunch of established residential uses. So I'd be interested in what else comes out in this application. I am very much on the offense in terms of approval or not at this point.
Thank you, Ms. Chandler. Mr. Holtzman, you had your hand up?
Well, I was just mentioning that looking for guidance from the official plan section 3.7.4.9 is policies related to establishing or expanding new pits. And as the member just rightly said, there are significant challenges that would have to be dealt with in order to establish a new pit, regardless of our application or not, if our new single family dwelling went in there. So I acknowledge what staff are looking at. They're looking at the policies to respect ongoing, but to establish a new pit along that area is going to be a huge challenge. And we've given you evidence today that the materials on our side, the subject lands and the lands to the north, are depleted. They're done. They're over with.
Thank you. Mr. Walker, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess in response to Mr. Holzman's question, Mr. Holzman's response, yes, I understand that the city does provide guidance on the establishment of a new pit, and by establishing a new residential lot without considering, those possibilities would further hinder or make it more difficult for a new pit to be established, and it would be against the policies of the official plan and the provincial policy statement, which aim to protect these resources.
Thank you. Mr. Holtzman, is it new information?
Yes, I should have mentioned that as part of the public process, everyone is circulated within 60 meters. There's a sign on site, and wouldn't you think that the people that operate the pit across the road, if they had concerns, they would speak up. They're obviously business people that have a vested interest in whether there's a new house. And the fact that what we understand is they have not come forward with any concerns, likely because, and this is conjecture, as Mr. Bird said, they are running through the end of their operation.
Thank you. Anything further, Ms. Chandler?
Could you circle back to me, please?
Absolutely. Mr. Otto, any questions, comments, or concerns?
Oh, a number of concerns. I don't think I need to express them because they've basically been expressed. I would rather have this adjourned and until they can hammer it out with the city in a little more detail.
Thank you. Mr. Vervoort, any questions, comments, or concerns?
I have a bit of a contrary view on this. I think we have to look at the practical side of it as well. And basically what we have across the road is a pit that's been used and rehabilitated. And we've got strip development of, 10 or 12 houses there already. This would be in the middle of the existing strip development, essentially. And I think the city's proposed condition that a satisfactory MRIA has to be provided to the city before consent is finalized, I think offers protection for the existing resource area, and the applicant seems quite confident that they can meet that condition. But that being said, I think there's some sense among the committee members that there are some issues here that require further discussion. So I would suggest maybe that we just reserve our decision on this.
Thank you, Mr. Vervoort. I'm coming back to you, Ms. Chandler. Unmute your microphone, please. Would you unmute your microphone, please, Ms. Chandler?
If the applicant wants to proceed, then I would prefer to defer this decision for us to discuss afterwards. I would, again, pass the opportunity back to the applicant to adjourn this to a further hearing and resolve the issues relating to the study with the city staff.
Thank you, Ms. Chandler. My opinion is that I really appreciate when we have a complete package and when staff hasn't had the opportunity to review the entire package and have it expanded upon to the best of their knowledge, that it makes it difficult for them to make real good comments to the committee. That being said, there are a lot of common sense things that we can look at in this application. To the north of the property, there's not going to be any more pits created. As Ms. Chandler noted, that if they decide to expand on the west side, it's going to be very, very difficult for a new pit to get a license to do that work with all the residential neighborhood surrounding it. To that end, I'd like to reserve judgment if panel is in agreement. We'll adjourn after at the end of this meeting and return to discuss this application in greater detail. Do I have an agreement with the panel to reserve judgment, and we'll take it up at the end of this meeting? All in favor? So we'll reserve judgment on this application. And before I go forward, I just want to confirm with you, Mr. Holtzman and Mr. Bird, that all 6 conditions, you're happy with the way they are.
On behalf of the applicant, yes, we are.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll reserve judgment, and you'll be able to get the answer at the end of
okay,
today.
thank you for the time,
Just Mr. Chairman, just a point of clarification, the written decision, if the committee reserves, will be out in 10 days.
Right.
The official decision will be issued in 10 days.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary.
I won't bug you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks. Okay, now we'll move on to application number 5, having to do with 1816 River Road. Mr. Hayward, Mr. Simmons, or sorry, Scott Hayward of Christopher Simmons Architects. Are you available, sir? I see Mr. Simmons.
Sorry, Mr. Hayward is also available.
Great.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much.
If you could let him join as well. Mr. Chair, if he would perhaps just give you an update since the last presentation we made.
Sure. I don't think we need to administer an oath. We have one from the last time, I believe. So we can go ahead and please proceed with a brief, because we do understand what this application is about. So if you could just be brief about your application.
Is Mr. Hayward able to be allowed to speak? Okay.
He's here.
I am available, yeah, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I think the last time we met was there was some confusion as to one of the applications for the setback to the existing river, and there was a confusion in the terminology of line of normal high water mark, and which is a City of Ottawa definition, and the normal water's edge, which is a surveyor's definition. So we've clarified that with the planner. We've also clarified the proposed addition and setbacks to the existing water's edge, and describe a bit more in detail the configuration of the second story roof additions, which face away from the river. We've also clarified some of the setbacks to the north. We had requested a 2.05 meter setback to the north, side yard setback, and we're willing to, because of confusion on the signage, willing to accept the 2.15 and work around that. There was an existing tree which was also brought up by the planner as a concern. We've documented to her that some of the dimensions on this site plan and the actual configuration of the building are showing a cantilever. So the actual root system and root ball of the existing tree have more clearance to the foundation than what is depicted in this one image, which is on the screen. That was pretty well it, I think, in terms of clarifications that were being requested. I also think that the city planner, Mrs. McAlpin, had the opportunity to review the documents a bit more in detail, and we've conferred with one each other over the last week or so and reached more of an understanding of what the actual requests for minor variance are and their implications on the site and on the neighboring properties. So I think that kind of wraps it up.
Thank you, Mr. Hayward. Anything more, Mr. Simmons?
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to make the comment that our addition and modification of this building was done strategically to have the least impact visually from the river and on the adjacent properties. My clients wished to reuse the existing foundations and footprint as much as possible, which is what we're doing. I'd be happy to make more comments if there's still any concerns from any neighbors. But there was a comment or suggestion that this is a neighborhood of bungalows, but the two properties immediately to the south of this site are larger volume two-story homes.
Thank you, sir. Ms. McAlpine, are you available to make some comments on behalf of the city?
Mr. Chair, I was provided the revised site plan.
We can't hear you for some reason, Ms. McAlpine. Can coordinator increase the volume on her microphone?
Can you hear me now?
A little bit better, but not much.
Can you hear me now?
That's better, but still, maybe get a little closer to the microphone, your microphone.
Sorry, can I get confirmation?
Yeah, not hearing you at all.
Hello?
We're hearing you a little bit. Speak a little more, and maybe. There you go.
A little bit? Okay.
Yeah, that's better.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so I was provided the revised site plan as well as a letter from the surveyor confirming the high water mark and water's edge were synonymous, and was provided a revised cover letter as well that provided the details requested. So with that, I have no further, no objection to the agreed by requested. And I think it's still
Okay, so I barely could hear you, but what I understand, you have no further comments or concerns with respect to this application, essentially.
That's correct.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I'd like to ask the panel for any comments, questions, or concerns. Mr. Otto?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Mr. Lewis?
Support.
Mr. Vervoort?
I just had one question. I wanted to clarify whether or not variance is 15 meters or 15.03 meters. I think there's Because I think in the original application, it was 15.03. And I think in the planning report, it refers to 15 meters. So I just want a clarification on what variance A would be.
The dimension would be 15 meters.
15 meters? Okay.
Yes.
I'm fine with that. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Chandler, any questions, comments, or concerns?
I had the same question just to clarify what the reduced setback was that was being applied for. So it's 15 meters to the between the normal high water mark and the existing.
Correct.
Great. Thank you. And there don't seem to be any conditions with this application. So I'd like to ask the panel if they are in favor of the application to please raise your hand. Your application is approved. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair.
And our last application today is application number 6, having to do with 5480 Bank Street. Mr. Donald Simmons of Tierney Stauffer, are you available, sir? You're muted, sir. There you go.
Yes, I am, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. I need to administer an oath about the statutory placement of the sign. Are you prepared to take that?
Mr. Chair, the sworn declaration was submitted at the original application date, and it was confirmed by the Madam Coordinator that it was filed.
Okay. Can you confirm that, Madam Coordinator? So,
that can be confirmed. We would have.
okay, thank you very much. So, Mr. Simmons, please proceed with your brief description of your application.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to the committee members. This application is an application to sever a piece of property. The current owner of the property is Newcastle Development, Inc. Newcastle Development, Inc. has entered into an agreement of purchase and sale to sell the portion to be severed to the adjacent property owner, which is actually my client, RJS 2009 Holdings, Inc. RJS 2009 Holdings, Inc. is appearing as the appointed agent for Newcastle and has carriage of the application. The piece of property in question is a vacant landlocked parcel of land. The size is indicated in the application. It is approximately 5,396 square meters. The proposal is to add this parcel of land to the adjacent property that my client, RJS 2009 Holdings, Inc. currently owns at 5438 Bank Street. 5438 Bank Street contains a residential home along with a automotive mechanical shop. The piece of property that the land is to be severed from is again owned by Newcastle Development, Inc., and it does contain an active sand and gravel extraction area. We have submitted a plan, site plan approved by the ministry since our last hearing date. It does confirm that the portion to be severed and conveyed is outside of the site plan and approved area for extraction. The portion of the at the last date, the city had two concerns, one of which was addressed by the filing of the site plan regarding the extraction. The other concern the city had was regarding a portion of the property being in what they was described as the floodplain overlay. And we have, I think it'd be helpful. Yeah, I think it'd be helpful to show the first the original sketch that we submitted with our application. It's, I think, Madam Coordinator, that yes, exactly. That it's a smaller scale sketch that we submitted with the original application. We submitted two with the original application, the one that was on the screen there, and then the sketch which shows the proposed area to be severed. I don't know if Madam Coordinator can put that up on the screen. I think it would be helpful. And then I'm not seeing anything on our screen other than all of us.
You had it up, I think, just a little bit ago.
Yeah. It's a portion of an R plan that is filed on the registry office.
No,
not that one. Yeah. That one, yes, exactly. We seem to keep moving past it very quickly. So look while it's in front of you. The purpose of looking at that first sketch is to demonstrate the property. It'll have to be resurveyed, of course, but it is to show that the plan by these two adjacent landowners was to sever off this parcel again, which is effectively landlocked, and to continue with the property line that has already been established by another piece of property to the south of this property. The actual address of that other piece of property is 5470 is the land to the south, and continue that property line. By doing so, however, there is we submitted a recent sketch with the flood plan overlay that shows that a portion of the proposed land to be severed does lie within the floodplain. And Mr. Walker has concerns about that. So perhaps we could hear from Mr. Walker, but again, I think it would be helpful if we could get the R plan up first, and then secondly, have a look at the sketch that has the flood plan overlay so that you can see what portion of the proposed lands will be within that.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons. Ms. Monette, would you please take us back just one page, because that was the sketch, I believe. There you go. That's the one we're looking for, I think, Mr. Simmons?
That's correct. And I've tried to outline it, I think, in red there. If you can see, it's the one that has a clear number 4 and INST period. That's the land that's sketched for the proposed severed piece of property. And my client owns pin 0058, which fronts onto Bank Street, which is sort of top left corner of that sketch.
Great.
And then if we could also look then at the piece of land, another sketch, if you like, that came from the flood plan overlay. I think if we go back one more, perhaps. Yes. So that's attempting to show the same piece of land, and it shows you which portion of the property does lie within the 100-year floodplain overlay.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons. I'd like to ask Mr. Walker to make some comments on behalf of the city.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The department has had an opportunity to review the application and continues to have some concerns with it. As Mr. Simmons mentioned, the site plan which was provided from the ministry has identified that the area to be severed are outside of the boundary of the licensed area and outside of the limits of of extraction for the site. And so that concern has been addressed. However, the department still has concerns with the severed area containing floodplain, being part of the floodplain overlay, because there hasn't been a rationale or it hasn't been demonstrated that there aren't any risk associated with it. Now, the intent of the flood, there's several intents of the floodplain overlay. Essentially, development is restricted in this area to minimize threat of harm or injury to people. Also, the intent is to reduce or eliminate the possibility of I guess the possibility that floodwaters can be contaminated, and to prevent the risk of property damage. At this point in time, there hasn't been any enough information provided to determine that this risk or that this isn't a risk, and especially given the fact that the site is currently used as an auto body shop. Those risks are increased. And so at this point in time, the department suggests that the area subject to the floodplain overlay be excluded from the severance, or lot line adjustment rather.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Any comments from?
May I respond to that? May
Absolutely.
I respond, Mr. Chairman? Essentially, this comes down to Mr. Walker's submission supporting the severance or lot line adjustment, provided, as I understand it, the new property line follows the floodplain overlay. I can indicate that I've discussed this with my client, and while he's certainly prepared to accept that, but I would submit that the risk of harm, of interference with the area is no greater if the property in question that is subject to the floodplain overlay is in the ownership of my client, RJS 2009 Holdings Inc., versus the current owner, Newcastle Developments Inc. Whoever is the owner of that portion is going to be subject to the floodplain overlay restrictions. My client has no intention of developing that property whatsoever. Quite frankly, if it was determined by the committee that that portion should be excluded, my client's willing to accept that because he doesn't intend to do anything actively with that piece of that part anyway. But it seems to me that in looking at the size and shape of the property in conformity with adjacent properties, that it makes more sense to have the property line follow the existing property line of this property to the south. And I can also indicate that the applicant is prepared to accept the conditions that the city has proposed in the submission by Mr. Walker. So it really comes down to, where do we put the property line?
Thank you.
That's
Mr.
all I
Simmons.
have to say. Yeah.
Thank you. Now I'd ask the panel for questions, comments, or concerns. Mr. Otto?
I don't think I have any concerns. I'd just like to point out that I do believe that this whole property at one point was a gravel pit, was it not? Has it been rehabilitated? But regardless of the answer to that, as the applicant stated, it doesn't matter whether the wetland's in his name or in someone else's name. It's still going to be a wetland and it's still going to be protected. Anyways, that's my comment.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis, any questions or comments?
I have no problem with the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Chandler?
I have a couple of brief questions. The property that would like to be enlarged, what is the current use on that property, and is it in conformity with the current zoning in place? Because this property will become dual zoned. They'd be acquiring a property that's zoned for mineral aggregate, correct?
So maybe I can respond to that, Ms. Chandler. When we did our pre-consultation, it was with the city prior to even launching our application, it was agreed that my client will have to apply for a rezoning of the property so that it is in conformity with his existing zoning on his existing property at 5438 Bank Street. That is the intention. In fact, that's one of the conditions suggested by Mr. Walker.
What does and what is the use on the property, and how does it relate to the existing zoning that would be expanded over that area?
Yeah, so there's a residence on that property, and there is an automotive mechanical shop on that property. Essentially, my client, for the lands that are not within the floodplain, obviously, He simply would like more parking, to put it blunt.
Okay.
So within the floodplain overlay, there are prohibited uses. And that certainly includes automotive type operations. What specifically was envisioned by this? Maybe this is to Mr. Walker. It's not clear to me in the condition for rezoning. I personally don't have a problem with a lot line going through a floodplain, provided there's still developable or usable land outside the floodplain on a lot. What I am concerned about is ensuring that the uses which are not compatible with floodplain are not extended into the floodplain area. So what would the zoning, underlying zoning be underneath the floodplain? Because I don't think you can extend the RU4 zoning if it allows for automotive uses onto the full extended lot line property where there's floodplain.
Mr. Walker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So currently the property to be enlarged is zoned RU with an exception which permits automobile uses. So as a condition, it is required to have the severed parcels rezoned. And if the committee is prepared to approve the application within that rezoning, the department can rezone that portion or right into the rezoning to prohibit any development into that area of the parcel. But you are correct in that as per section 59 of the zoning bylaw, automotive uses aren't permitted within the floodplain. But the main issue is, for instance, let's just say if the property owner decides to store material within that area without obtaining any permit. That's the concern here. The risk is in the permitted uses. The risk is what they can potentially do without permission if the property is under their ownership.
Thank you. Ms. Chandler?
There's always a risk, as Mr. Walker has described, but I do tend to fall back on what is required or regulated or permitted or prohibited. So my suggestion would be, well, I don't have an issue with the property being extended across the back there. I would like the condition to reflect that the RU4 zone, with the exception for automotive uses, should not be extended into the area where the floodplain boundary is. I don't think that's appropriate. It sets up two conflicting zones with the zone and the overlay. I'd like, they could just put in a zone underneath it which does not allow for automotive uses when they do the rezoning, and I don't think that's additionally onerous to the applicant. But I don't think the exception zone zoning that allows for automotive uses should be extended into the floodplain zone area.
Thank you. Mr. Vervoort, any questions or comments? I'm sorry, you're muted, Mr. Vervoort.
Apologies. I think Mr. Walker indicated that could be a rezoning. So I agree with Ms. Chandler's comments.
Thank you. So, Mr. Walker, are you able to assure the committee that that zoning, that condition, that the zoning not allow for automotive use be included as part of the conditions of this application?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the department generally we're not in the habit of rezoning properties in a way that will have split designations, and that's one of the main reasons why it's recommended the property be rezoned. And so I don't know if the department would be willing to support a rezoning of the parcel and exclude the area that's zoned floodplain to remain zoned ME2. However, there may be a way for us to write within the rezoning to limit development to the front portion of the property that's not subject to the floodplain overlay.
Thank you. Would that be helpful, Ms. Chandler?
Well, I don't know anywhere that there's an issue ever with split zoning on properties. It's all over the city, environmental zoning and split zoning everywhere. But I don't mind if it's an exception zone that at least lays out that automotive uses are not to occur in the rear area that's subject to the floodplain. I dislike seeing zoning with an exception that allows for automotive uses under an overlay that specifically prohibits them. That's not a good message.
Through
Mr. Walker.
Yeah, I just want to just make a comment. So despite the provisions and the exception, the provisions of the floodplain overlay would prevail.
I know, but you can understand the confusion where you have an overlay that should prevail, but in the underlining zone, there is an exception that says, but automotive uses can often take place. It's an argument that no one wants to have.
Okay, Mr. Simmons, would your client be accepted? Would he accept the fact that they would not be able to do automotive on that parcel of land? At the back?
On the portion that's subject to the floodplain overlay, he has no intentions of doing anything with respect to that parcel other than keeping it clean of debris and garbage. The portion that's outside of that is included in the severed land is more than sufficient for him and his intentions. The only other thing I would comment is, and maybe Mr. Walker could help with this, but the property to the north of this, I would think has the exact same zoning and may well already have this floodplain overlay over top of the RU4 designation. And Mr. Walker has confirmed that the floodplain overlay takes precedence. Again, my client has no intention of doing anything within the lands that are in the floodplain overlay, but I think it already exists to the property to the north. I don't know if Mr. Walker can comment on that or not.
Mr. Walker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just did a check. The property to the north is zoned RU Urban Exception 372, and it does not permit an automobile use. Don't permit retail store, along with the other permitted uses under the underlying RU zone. But it is subject to the floodplain overlay.
Okay. So to that end, I guess we've got a couple of situations where we would like to add, or 2 votes, I think I'd like to try and see if this works. With respect to the existing condition that is laid out, 5012 condition, that's the only condition that I see on Mr. Walker's PED report. I'd like to ask the...
Mr. Chair, there is a second condition requiring rezoning.
Well, I don't see it on my notes. I apologize, but it just doesn't seem to be on mine. But that's fine. We'll do it then. There's only one vote then to be taken, the 5012 condition, as well as the condition that Ms. Chandler was suggesting that would limit the use of the zoning of this property to not include anything on the floodplain that is automotive. So with that amendment, I'd like to ask the panel for approval of this application. All in favor? So your application is approved, Mr. Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members.
You're welcome.
Have a good day.
Thank you. So I guess we'll now adjourn this portion of the meeting, and then Madam Coordinator, would you please send us another link to our meeting for the reserved judgment. Thank you.
Thank you.